This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. If you are joining us on YouTube and wish to listen to this program as a podcast, you may click the link below to your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with Gayle Greene, Professor Emerita of English, Scripps College of the Claremont Colleges in Southern California. We will begin by taking a look at her recent book, Immeasurable Outcomes, Teaching Shakespeare in the Age of the Algorithm. This series is funded with support from the Aoyama Gakuin University Institute of the Humanities, and also with a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Gayle Greene, there you are, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great being here. Wherever we are.
Wherever we are in cyberspace. I'm in Tokyo, you're on the West Coast. I'm assuming somewhere near Los Angeles, is that right? Are you out?
No, north of on the coast, north of San Francisco, way
north
up.
Of San Francisco, north. Way up.
Yeah.
So that's a different country. Yeah. And even from where you,
it's quite.
You did your career at Scripps College in Pomona, which is right outside of Los Angeles proper. Yeah, so that's a different country, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Quite different.
I have just finished reading your fabulous book entitled Immeasurable Outcomes, Teaching Shakespeare in the Age of the Algorithm. And when I began the book, it began with a history that I'm sort of familiar with. You've done some extensive research on the history of the decline of the humanities. And I was thinking, well, I'm wondering when we're going to get to Shakespeare. And then we did. And we got to a lot of Shakespeare and very detailed explanations with character-driven explanations of what happens in a classroom. And I thought, oh, I get it. This is a lot of stuff put together, because then we get a lot of your personal life, your memoir. So this is a cultural history. It's a memoir. It's a bit of a practicum on how to approach teaching Shakespeare or any other humanities subject, author, whatnot, in the classroom. And yeah, operatic. And you can't just dip in here. You just have to read this from beginning to end. And in the end, I think we do feel that even with all the bad things that have happened, that maybe there is a possibility of a good outcome if we keep plugging away and arguing for the humanities. But may I ask you to give us a bit of an overview of your book?
That's a nice description. I like the way you described it. It did come about when I was sort of nearing the end of my career, and I'd had a wonderful time teaching. And I saw that the humanities were being trashed every which way. I mean, enrollments were plummeting. I mean, they have a bad press. Really bad press out there, politicians dumping on them, cutting them, administrators cutting, and it was very frightening to me. It was also, I took it kind of personally because it was my life's work, and I never doubted for a moment that it was essential work. It was really great what was happening in I love teaching. So I set about asking, well, what hit us? What the hell has happened, that has changed the conversation so completely from when I was, an undergraduate. And even then people were saying, you want to study Shakespeare? Isn't that a little weird? Even then it was sort of seen as impractical. But the liberal arts was the cornerstone of an educational system that was the envy of the world. The reason we turned out original, groundbreaking technological scientific discoveries is because we asked our engineers to read, to know something about the world. And so our educational system, which I always thought was really pretty terrific, and so have rankings and so forth, we're always like, the top 100, we're the top 50, or we used to be. We're slipping in the rankings, actually. Is now, like a punching bag for Republicans mainly, but also Democrats. Anyway, it scared me. It really scared and alarmed me. So I set out to find out what hit us, and also to look, I did some soul searching. Okay, well, what the courses are fun. I love them. But what use are they? You know, what value is what goes on in the humanities classroom? And that's where the book began. And just to give a rough overview, it starts with
Yes.
the first day of class, ends with the last day of class, but gives the last word to the graduates and alums.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
the last chapter is a lot. It's called Ask a Graduate. And if you want to find out the value of something, you ask the man who drives one. There used to be an old ad about Packard. Packard, do they even exist? They don't. um,
That's right.
ask the person who has got the education, you know, what it's worth. And I just got eloquent answers from my students, our graduates, our alums. You know, anyway, that part was really fun, interviewing students. So that's kind of an overview.
Let's talk a bit about your personal life and background, because you lived this and this cultural history, and we have a chronicle really in this book of what happened during your own career.
The story of my life is as it relates to public education, as it relates to education in the latter part of the 20th century. And I realized writing this that I, of course, had lived through history, as we all, none of us realize when we're doing it, only in retrospect. And I was born into this sort of sweetest spot, and I, came of age in the middle of the century when enthusiasm about public education was at a height, and we had just won the war. We'd won World War II. We felt really good about ourselves. We were full of sort of enthusiasm for improving a lot of other people as well. You know, I mean, this was the GI Bill, where we sent really millions of farm boys, you know, kids who were straight off the farm, to school, and it was enormously successful. It was the time that we instituted our Social Security program, and you know, there was, as I talked about later, a kind of social safety net. And I came into the educational system, into UC Berkeley, the year after the master plan had been put in place. I didn't know this, of course. I was a mere sophomore, and it never occurred, I didn't have to apologize for studying the liberal arts. The liberal arts were the cornerstone of this educational system. I mean, they were, the farm boys and the GI plans were studying the humanities, much to the surprise of many people who thought they would go for the technological majors. They didn't. They actually wanted to study things like Shakespeare. Well, I did too. And it was, it was just a really good time to do that. There was no need to apologize for it. Of course, it had to do with post-war prosperity, this optimism, just as, well, we were a prosperous country then, and we felt good about ourselves. The problem, so, there was this wave of exuberance. The problem was that education was actually too successful. We began to feel entitled. And what entitlements, used by Republicans to mean, free handouts or something, what it really meant was a standard of living, and not only for ourselves, but for other people. Unions were strong. We expected workers' rights, but we also expected other people's rights, and this is when the great social movements that they came out of the universities, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and then eventually the women's movement and the environmental movement. Well, this was alarming to big business, to corporations, because, unions, I mean, salaries cost money. Quality of life costs money, and we were getting very feisty. And you could see that, of course, when the demonstrations happened, and that gave the excuse to kind of crunch down on them. Ronald Reagan said he would stop them at the point of a bayonet if necessary. I mean, it was very violent. He put down those demonstrations violently. He ran against, he ran for governor against the University of California. The first thing he did was fire Clark Kerr. I mean, he was really quite ruthless about it. But behind him was money, was a lot of money that wanted to stop, was corporate America that really wanted to put a lid on these demonstrations. They're very anti-education, not only higher education, because look what happened when, all these millions of graduates came out of, the big state systems. They started making social movements. They made the women's movement. Well, that came actually later. They made the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the women's movement, and the environmental movement. Now that stuff costs money, and you don't want people who critically think. And, there are documents that say this, they're a threat to free enterprise. They're a threat to, we have to stop them. And it was a concerted effort to put the brakes on the humanities, especially the humanities, because STEM, that's okay. We can use the engineers, we can't use the critical thinkers. They didn't want us. Anyway, so that's a very ugly story. And that was kind of folded into my own, happy story, which was really landing in a wonderful place, a small liberal arts college that let me teach what Andrew Delbanco calls us a relic. We're, somebody who has tenure, somebody who can structure their own courses, somebody who's protected by academic freedom and tenure. I mean, really, I landed in the sweet spot. I really landed in this. I got my education free. I didn't get my PhD from Berkeley. I should have, but I went on to Columbia, and that was not. I mean, Berkeley was the exciting place. Let me put it that way, but. Yeah, and so Scripps was a pleasure to teach at, because these kids were also, I was a feminist, and Scripps is a women's college, and so I was, the courses I was offering and structuring and working out were very welcome at Scripps. I didn't have to fight that battle of, being a woman, being a feminist. Many of my friends and colleagues did. They had terrible battles. I didn't. So it was really nice. And then the other thing that happened is they let me kind of change subjects, which I did about 5 times, because literary criticism got a little theory cluttered for me. I wasn't too fond of. I didn't want to read Lacan and Derrida, and I those were not. They were not very interesting to me. So I started writing about kind of real world subjects like biography and memoir, and sort of some sciencey writing, like about sleep research.
Yeah.
And my college was quite wonderful about this. They supported me. They said, she's publishing, she's out there in the world. Well, why not? Why should she be writing another article about Shakespeare? I haven't written about Shakespeare in about 30 years. This is coming back to Shakespeare, and writing about Shakespeare was really interesting to me, because of course I still love him. He's still the best we've ever done.
Yeah, for our viewers in Japan, internationally, I wanted to describe the environment. I did a master's degree at the graduate school, Claremont Graduate School.
Yeah,
and,
I saw that.
That was, you were there, and we just didn't cross paths.
Was I really? Who did you? We have to do the who.
I worked probably most closely with Al Friedman, who was in the
Okay.
school, and
Yeah.
let's see, Bill Spingaman, Wiggum, and Waingro, Marshall Waingro. And these guys were, well, at least 2 of them were well along when I got there, maybe, or let's call it early 80s.
Right.
But you're in, really, yes, it is a throwback a bit, because you're in a cluster of colleges, and it's a brilliant idea.
It really is.
It's based on the Oxfordian Cambridge example of putting together, several colleges and and bringing in people from all kinds of backgrounds. So you have Harvey Mudd, the trainer of astronauts, and my roommate was a Mudd graduate, and he was just outrageously brilliant.
They are.
He switched. He had all the math he wanted and all the science, and he went to get a PhD in history. And he could do that without having to move very far. It was there for him at the graduate school. There was Pitzer, the school that you thought about arts. There was, of course, back then, Claremont Men's College, which is now Claremont McKenna, but it had the kind of, let's say, jockey type guys who might be more of in political science, heading towards that kind of, so at that time, male oriented. And then the institution of Pomona, absolutely wonderful faculty throughout. And then you have over there Scripps and the Motley, where we would go. And you would hope
Oh
you would
yeah.
hope you might strike up, I'm a young man, you hope you might strike up a conversation with one of
Right.
the polite, well deported young people there at Scripps. It was there were a lot of dance majors, there were humanities majors, but very bright. I guess what I'm saying is there was everything for everybody, and there still is.
Yeah. Right.
It's just
Right.
that
Right.
that whole idea has been under attack of the
Yeah.
integration of all
Yeah.
these disciplines through institutional affiliation and the ability to move. You could take
Yeah.
classes
Yeah.
here and there. You didn't have to. You had mud students in your uh, Shakespeare class, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah. Oh, I love Debbie. They're mutters, we call them mutters.
Mutters, yes.
Mutters. No, they were absolutely great. I sometimes look at my pre-registration and I think, holy mackerel, how are these kids gonna ever go together? And then you realize they go together better than anything because they're so interested in each other. They've never met anybody like, the returning 52-year-old Black woman from Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
who is quite outspoken, the uptight computer guy from, Mud, and the laid back dance mate. I mean, it really worked. I mean, they're interested in one another and they learn from one another. And yeah, you described the mix at Claremont really well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the brilliance. There's a lot of brains there too.
A lot of brains there,
I mean,
and
Pomona's always like, Harvey Mudd is like, I think it's number one on the list of, salaries, straight out of
yeah.
college salaries. I hate these lists. I absolutely hate them, but I'm always amused to find out. And that's because it's got a liberal arts base and a really good science, second to Caltech or maybe rivaling Caltech in the
Oh yeah.
state. And Pomona is like and actually CMC also are in the top 5% of liberal arts colleges.
Oh
So
yeah.
I mean, we really run a tight ship,
Yeah.
and the cluster is a brilliant idea. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's sad that more colleges can't do that. But we are physically, so a student can take a Harvey Mudd class and then run right over to my class in Shakespeare. It's right. They don't have to get on a shuttle bus or
No.
schedule so that one is it's really easy. It's you can walk it.
Yeah, you can walk it.
Anyway, it's a big plug for the Claremont colleges, but let's do it.
Yeah, and I think of course, as you were talking, I remember one professor, not part of the graduate school, saying at that time that he privately to me, because I guess I look like the guy you can tell this to, that he really didn't take women seriously as scholars. And I'm going, well, I'm not going to study with
Oh
this guy. But
God, I
yeah, and
know.
this
I
was
know.
getting up to into,
Well,
and it
Scripps was,
lasted a long time. So there was a liberal
it
element,
certainly did.
and
Yeah.
you came in through all of this. There was
And
some tough stuff for a woman striving to be received as an intellectual in your day when you were in graduate school.
well, yes, I mean, it's true in a way, although Scripps was very welcoming. I mean, they wanted, women who were out strong and scholarly. I was always very, I wrote. And it was around the other colleges where you'd pick up this patronizing attitude sometimes. It's just very funny. I don't know. I always found it funny because I had the support of my own institution. That mattered a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember the first public paper I ever gave was on Anna Karenina,
Mm-hmm.
and a CMC professor who had slept most of the talk because I could see and he woke up afterwards at the end. He said, I want to say something. I want to say that Tolstoy was a great writer. And his portrayal of women was great. And I'm like, Anyway, that was the tenor. And that was the tenor of the times in terms of conferences as well. You would go out and give a paper and you get attacked. But, I didn't really mind it because I did have the strength of support from my own college.
Yeah,
And other feminist scholars.
and
We were all
attacked
finding our voices.
attacked beyond any tie to what you just said, right? That there was just something coming
Mhm.
on,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
a lot of this was coming from the East. and some of these stayed, let's say, Ivy League schools of the East. It wasn't a
Oh, yeah.
California thing, at least not in the intellectual area. And it surprised me because I thought I was going to California. You know, I'm from the American South. Maybe we can expect this there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to
Yeah.
California
Yeah.
now, and
Yeah.
then to boom, run right back into that. But I want to make it abundantly clear, this was 40 years ago for me, and things have changed,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
you know, a lot. You
Things
know,
have changed.
all the faculty in the graduate school program I was in were
Yeah.
men at that time. Now you would not find
Yeah.
that. You'll
Yeah.
find much more diversity.
Right.
And I'm on the, you know, alumni
Right.
newsletter, and I see what kinds of things are going on.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
completely different place, and a very fine place still.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
all the way through all of those colleges, and I think the graduate school too. Uh,
Yeah.
let's talk about this. That okay, yes, from the conservative side, from the Philistine press. Let's just go to the old words. Philistine press, from the utilitarians, from the people who say, okay, graduate, get your job, live in a cubicle, retire, and die. And that's
Yeah.
what your life's all about. You know, you're gonna be plug and play, and we're gonna make sure that nothing else happens. And what joys there must be in that. But you're protected a bit from that at Scripps, but it's moving, and it's moving quickly, and it breaches the walls and gets in there. And what surprises me is it's adopted in a way by a fairly liberal educational industry that creeps into academia, and also an administration, an explosion of administrative jobs where suddenly teachers are being told what to do by people who have never taught, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the managerial administrator, that's brought in from business to kind of shape things up. I mean, I had a whole chapter that I had to drop because I had to cut so much from this book about how education is not business.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not turning out a product, or if we are turning out a product, it's a human being. And that's quite different from something that comes down an assembly line, and it can't be chopped up and predicted, and you don't want it to be. I mean, it's human, it's immeasurable, it's exciting, it's unpredictable, it's creative. I mean, no algorithm can do it justice. And yeah, I mean, we have to resist that. I mean, the liberal arts is a site of resistance. I mean, they have to resist the quantitative chopping up of human life, into, as you say, plug and play, and then you die. I mean, that's like not, I mean, that may serve the interests of corporations, and it does. I mean, you want widgets in corporations. You don't want thinking people. I mean, you actually do if you want to excel. I mean, you want creative people, but you probably don't know that because your management is geared to a certain, anyway. The liberal arts has got to stand up for qualitative measures, quality of life. I mean, we're producing human beings who have lives to live, children to raise. Our graduates raise the next generation. That's something really interesting to me because I'm on Facebook with a lot of former students, and I watch their kids grow up, and I think, oh my God, she looks just like so-and-so did, when she was my student. And that's really fun. But so education ripples out, what I taught. Her name happened to be Claire, the one I'm thinking of, is going to, it's going to be in her kids. It's going to be in her profession. I mean, she happens to be a lawyer, and she's on the right side of things. And I'm so proud of her, and that's what we, that's what we produce. And it's human, and we have to, and it comes back to the humanities, right? Humanities have something to do with human beings, humane beings. And it has something to do with resisting dehumanization, which is just blighting our culture. I mean,
Yes.
it's just very hard to be reduced to a number, and you can't resist it. I mean, you deal with your healthcare system, and you're a number, you're a statistic, and students are talked about as though they're data points or numbers on a graph or test scores.
Yeah.
They're not. They're human beings, and that's why we need small classes, interaction, professors who are sufficiently well supported so that they can, spend time with their students and get to know their students and treat them as human beings. Because if you treat them as human beings, there's a better chance they might turn out as human beings and treat other people as human beings. And that's kind of the whole argument of my book. And why Shakespeare is so wonderful, because he's, of course, the center of kind of humanism and a humanistic writer, if there ever was one.
Well, it's the thing about Shakespeare, and we will have people here who are very interested in your approach to teaching Shakespeare, and we're putting Shakespeare into this much larger kind of crumbling architecture of the humanities studies that we range back to classical antiquity. And I don't want to get on a pulpit. This is you're our guest, but this was the foundational principle of the university, of Socratic reasoning, of anything that we ever wanted to do. However, let's get to your Shakespeare. You're teaching how the art of teaching a class of small students, bringing in their lives from the world, some of them well-adjusted, some not so well-adjusted, others trying to find themselves, exploring their identity in these formative years, and how Shakespeare fits with that and that reckoning for young people.
Right. It's really quite a challenge. I mean, like the Claremont colleges are, well, they're a bubble. They're always called a bubble because they're isolated, from the world and stuff, but they're really not. I mean, as we've talked about, these kids are incredibly diverse, and you have to like find, the ball to pitch to them, and how to pitch it. And the point, you've got to reach them where they live. I mean, and Shakespeare can do that because Shakespeare writes about human beings and relationships and conflicts and problems and families. And I mean, it's all there. I mean, there's so many ways into a Shakespeare play. So you make it relatable. I hate that word relatable. I don't mind when they say, I can't relate or I'd like to relate. That's perfectly legitimate. But when they say Shakespeare's not relatable, that means you haven't found a way to relate, or I haven't found the way to help you relate, and so there's so many points of entry with Shakespeare. I mean, you can start with, well, let's see. The first time I taught Lear, I thought, okay, this is the first time I'm like I'm a freshman at teaching. King Lear is about the decline of feudalism and the rise of capitalism. Well, the blank stares, and everybody was asleep by the time I was finished with the pitch. But now you ask the question, okay, how do you feel when somebody asks you, how much do you love me? How does it make you feel? What kind of a question is that? Why is it a bad news question? What does it do to you? What are the possible answers to it? And then you get into it. Like, I mean, that gets them talking. So there's just many ways into it. And there's many things you can do with it. For one thing, fun, pleasure. I mean, these are plays, and he's playing with the idea of plays. He's a player. He's an actor. He knows the uses of play, this playwright. And kids these days, I mean, a lot of them, when they come to us from K-12, so-called reformed school, where they've been taught that learning is drill and kill and bubble fill, which is the way they describe the multiple choice exams, and the drills and skills and literature has either been eliminated. I mean, because you need all your time for testing in the system, because test scores are all that matter. And so their acquaintance with imaginative literature is almost nothing. And what literature they've read it as reduced to kind of drills and skills, so anything that can be tested, and the tests have to be computerized. I mean, I'm talking about public school reform, No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and the Common Core. Thank you, Bill Gates. And so they don't have a sense that this applies to their lives or that this is fun. And so you have to almost like breathe life back into the enterprise, into the classroom. I mean, I really, like I make a joke and they don't laugh. And I have, wait a minute, what happened? And it's almost like once you explain a joke, it of course loses it. But, stand-up comics will not come to campuses anymore because
Yeah.
kids are so humorless. I mean, I'm generalizing, painting with a very broad brush, but I
Well,
mean,
that's that group. There's that group that shut
right.
down. And the
I
irony
mean,
is, I remember years ago in the South when I began teaching, if one of the kids in a smaller class announced at the beginning, "I'm a Christian." Now we're in a room full of people who are Baptist, Methodist, everybody, goes, but they're the Christian in the room. You go, okay, we're going to have to shut down a portion
yeah,
here,
yeah,
or else I'm going to be talking to the dean.
yeah,
And because I omitted a word or something that offended, and then there's kind of been a shift where it comes in from another
yeah.
side, right?
And
No,
it's
yeah,
very hard to deal with that. I
yeah,
mean, I retired some years ago, and I'm very glad I got out when I got out because it's only got worse. And the horrible thing is that I see the humanities as breaking down walls between people, making connections. I mean, people are able to see their commonality with other people. They're able to see that we're all part of the same sort of human stew. I mean, that's really, Shakespeare shows that so beautifully because he's got kings and commoners and, clowns and, very dignified people. I mean, he's just got all kinds. And in a class, a small class, you model that in a way. They see that they have something in common with somebody who they never thought they would, and they become interested in that person and that point of view. So along comes this woke movement and throws up walls. Suddenly we're holier than thou, and before it was PC and now it's woke. Whatever you call it, it has no place in the classroom. It really doesn't. I mean, I just am very adamant about that. I'm also adamant about trigger warnings and safe spaces. Of course, the classroom should be safe from abusive or, divisive language. Of course, that goes without saying. I mean, what planet are we on? But we don't need, policing of our language, I mean, and these walls, suddenly they come up again, and suddenly we're holier than thou. And it absolutely is counterproductive. It's suicidal. More than counterproductive, it's suicidal.
yeah. I'm
I mean,
hoping I'm feeling a bit of a pushback now, but basically, if you or me in that environment, you don't get very far within, particularly if you're a younger scholar trying to advance.
mhm,
It does
mhm,
not help you to speak out against
I
this
know.
sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of silence, but I do
Yeah.
think that there's some pushback. There's a resistance. It reminds me of the way sometimes my colleagues in Japan, you know, we don't have these strident opinion makers and so forth, but you just feel this consensus building. It's almost mystical. And you're going, oh, it's not going to succeed. We're going to move that demon away for a while.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes
Uh-huh.
you can't get it to happen.
Right.
So
Right.
I do feel a little bit of that in listening to podcasts and so forth, that there
Mhm,
is
mhm.
a sort of settled in movement. I, I, and the trigger warnings you were talking about, and God, we're going to have, someone is blinded on stage. They pull out an eye, they pull out eyes. They kill children. They,
Right.
it's just, and bake them in pies. And I mean, just all kinds of,
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
you even, said, here's where we're going. All right.
Yeah.
And as
Right.
you pointed out,
Yeah.
you see it, you can go to Game of Thrones, you can go to any
Right.
number of,
Right.
it seems
Yeah.
that the theme now for new series, darker the better, right? And uh,
Right.
and
Right.
we're not
Right.
going to get much darker than that,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and killing your brother and marrying your brother's wife. Okay, but I don't know. It just seems to be a kind of power play that comes from people that are discontented about other things rather than
Yes,
what we're
that's
trying
what
to
I
do.
think. I think they're kind of terrified about their future, and they should
Yeah.
be. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, it's really what's out there for them is not, it's not nearly as welcoming as the world was when I came out.
Yeah.
And that was pretty scary too. But
Yeah.
so they get really hysterical about, that insensitive thing that somebody said, you know, and that's not where the problem is. I mean, the problem is, you know, drive a few miles, any direction of those pastoral colleges, the Claremont colleges, and see the public schools that are boarded up because of this coup of the educational system. I mean, and the major universities like Penn and Yale and, I mean, they're surrounded by these slums, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah.
But those are huge problems, and they're intractable. And how are you going to tackle them? And it's much easier to tackle so-and-so who said that insensitive thing. And I think that's what's going on.
I had to live in Pomona because I couldn't afford a place over on Foothill on the other side of campus, and I didn't have a car. And that's almost I mean there are tiers of people, and but beneath there the bottom line are people who don't have cars in LA. And having lived many years in Tokyo now, and not ever owning a car, when you're in, okay, so I'm getting out and I'm walking 3 miles to school, and there's the 10 freeway, and on the side, on the Pomona side, you see out of a 30s movie or something, a hobo camp. And guys, with the fire, walk under the bridge, and on the other side is a little lady, raking her beautiful grass lawn. And they're just this far apart.
Right.
And you go, wow.
Yeah.
But that's the case with so many, and in particular, many elite institutions. You step beyond those walls, you're in a potential horror show out there.
I mean, yes. And when I went to Columbia, I lived about 25 blocks south, and I would walk up Broadway. And in those, it wasn't gentrified. Now it's much gentrified. You walk up Broadway, and there's nothing but banks and AT&T, and it was actually much more colorful in my day, but it was kind of scary. I mean, it was really a gauntlet. You walked to get to school. I mean, Columbia's all characteristically been surrounded by kind of horrifying.
Yeah. Well, but you do talk about, and I love, the moments where you describe these students. And there was my students are primarily Japanese, and I'm in the humanities. Most of the men, just from historically in Japan, go to the STEM areas, the business and engineering sciences. We have some men, and I really appreciate having men in my class because it seems to balance. I've had all women's seminars, and but I would say 80% plus. We're really kind of in a women's college here, but they do get jobs because they have that one utility, if nothing else, good English skills. And corporations in Japan want good English skills, but they also are very well deported, very presentable, just fine people, usually from good homes. And it struck me when I left the States and came here. I felt like, oh, I'm a better teacher now. I may have learned something. And I realized, no, it was the students changed. I had better students. So I was using the same stuff, right? But you were up against some challenges and cultural changes, I guess, toward the end of your career, where you have these kids who are over medicated, who are brought in, who are stuck in, looking at something in their hand, and part of that addiction and the pathology that can come from that. And in many cases, there were turnings within your seminar. You could see them turning, or at least coming out and getting better. A kind of reparative thing seemed to be going on sometimes, not all the time.
Right. Well, the changes have that. I mean, the attention span is less. The seriousness, I don't think the classes matter to them as much as they did when I first came to Scripps. When I first came to Scripps, it was like a high. I felt I was absolutely in the right place at the right time. They wanted to hear what I had to say. They had infinite patience. My God, the amount of reading I used to give, I couldn't give a fraction of that now without losing having no enrollments. So you assign less, you move faster because their attention spans, they get bored. And so I'd find myself like getting, okay, they're done with this scene. I'm not done with the scene. I mean, I know there's a lot more to say about it, but we have to move on. So I felt a subtle change in pressure because the attention span thing with all the distractions, all the gizmos, I mean, that's really been a big change. And pretty much everybody talks about that. It's not, and being able to assign less. And because they have so much else going on in their lives. I mean, they have so many pressures on them. Many more of them are working than did in my day. Many more of them have family responsibilities because their families are, I mean, what we're dealing with is a really bad economy. So I've had kids who, I'm sorry, I missed this week. I had to help my parents move out. Our house was foreclosed.
Oh my,
We didn't used to. I mean, when I taught in open admissions at Brooklyn College and Queens College, there were things like that happened. But
yeah.
now it's everywhere. And I'm sorry, my mother, was, tried to commit suicide this weekend. I mean, it's
Oh
just
my.
horrible stuff like that. I mean, really, I
I,
would get these excuses. And the thing of suicide is like real, I
yeah,
mean, they live with it. They know people
yeah,
who've done it. And in their high schools, I mean, kids, not I mean, it's really a nightmare out there. And
yeah,
the mental health crisis is much talked about now, and it ought to be talked about because it's a huge thing we have to deal with. And it falls on a lot of it falls on faculty, and faculty should be there for them. I mean, I
yeah,
never minded talking kids through problems. I never minded that. But on the other hand, my classes weren't huge. I didn't have classes of 400. I didn't have, I had a relationship with them. And so it
mhm,
meant it was just an extension of a relationship. But the counseling services are way overcrowded, and there need to be more of those. And yeah, I mean, there have been really bad changes because the society has had, well, what's happened essentially, going back to my, how the humanities took a great fall. I mean, what happened after World War II was a wonderful spirit of social responsibility. We had pulled together and won a war, and we were great. We thought well of ourselves, we thought well of other people, we felt we had a responsibility. And that's when Medicare, Social Security, National Health Service in Britain, God, I wish we'd gotten one.
yeah,
And the social legislation, a social safety net, so people they weren't up against it. Now they're up against it. I mean, there
yeah,
is no social safety net. You lose your house, tough,
yeah,
you're on the street. I
yeah,
mean, I'm too bad for you. You're disposable. And that's what we're feeling in classes, even classes as selective and as supposedly sheltered and buffered from the world as Claremont. No place is buffered from this.
yeah,
It's sitting everywhere. And so it obviously impacts the classroom in an adverse way. It makes it harder to get their attention, harder to get them to, I had classes that went from 7 to 10. I could get them to sit there till 10:30 or 11 if we had something interesting going. No way, not anymore. They're
not
out of there,
anymore.
a meeting, they have somebody to, something else to do. There's so many pressures on them.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, it's still Shakespeare, though, isn't it? Because you have
yeah.
both things. You have reading, a language that if a student, and I've had students, not all of them, but the better ones, and others who sort of do turn, the fascinating use of language and
Mhm.
how
Mhm.
reading is important, and then you get that extra benefit. These are dramas; these are
Yeah,
stage spectacles,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that still can pull in so many. It's still just a wonderful.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but a body of text to bring in to explore
Yeah,
in this tough teaching environment, because if anything's going to catch their attention, and if you can grab them with Shakespeare, you do see people who
yeah,
go
yeah,
through this kind of daunting, as by the way, I did
yeah, yeah,
more in
yeah,
high school, and
yeah,
I'm not so sure it wasn't
yeah,
Kent's cursing of Oswald, but
yeah,
that got me. I'm
yeah,
going. Wow. Okay. I like this. There's something
I
good there.
know, and I
Being a
see that.
boy, in high school. But there's so many little entry points,
Right.
doors to walk through. And you
Yeah.
talk about this in your book a good bit through very graphic descriptions of the personalities of your students. I'm assuming you're changing in names and so
Yeah,
forth.
they're composite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
composite images,
Yeah.
but I see these
Yeah.
kids and
Yeah.
we know these kids.
We certainly do. Yeah, I mean, the one who comes in trying to decide whether she's going to major in chemistry because her parents want her to do something practical, and then she falls in love with Shakespeare. And
Yeah.
I never leaned on her. I tried to get her to hear her own voice. What do you want to do with your life? Anyway, it was decided by the end of the semester because she was so taken to Shakespeare. I mean, she just loved it. Others, they don't love it so much because language is not really where they live anymore. They live in visuals. I mean, so it's hard to get them to attend to the words on the page. Let's look, okay, you don't like Lear. Why don't you let's look at the words. What does he say? What does he do? What other people say about him? I mean, to teach them to attend to the words to read is kind of challenging. The wonderful thing that we today, thanks to technology, have going for us is films. I mean,
Yes.
in my day, watching a Shakespeare production was a big deal. You had to haul yourself to the theater across the bay in San Francisco, or you had to, um, I remember when Burton's Hamlet was playing for 2 nights.
Uh,
It was a film version. It wasn't
yeah.
him actually
And if
doing
you
it.
didn't see it in a theater, you didn't see it. It was
Right, yeah,
gone.
I know. It was just really a big deal to see something, but now you can
You can,
stream, a
yeah,
dozen different Hamlets. And I use that. I use the films a lot in my in
yeah,
teaching. It reached, I mean, some of them who couldn't be reached by language could be reached by performance.
yeah.
And so
Same here. Same
yeah,
here. It's just such a wonderful, and we do have these
yeah,
classrooms now on the positive end. They're all outfitted with overhead projectors. You
right.
have the
Yeah.
ability to
Yeah.
move in and out, and so show segments and talk about it,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And next year, we're going to be able to use Joel Cohen's Macbeth or sections of it
Mhm.
and look at
Mhm.
Macbeth with a graduate class that I have right at the beginning, and everybody's excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that grabs you.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so,
No, I mean, it's
yeah.
really, as I describe in the book, my Hamlet film assignment, where you're supposed to pretend to be the director. I mean, you
Uh-huh.
have been assigned to direct Hamlet, and you can use bits and pieces from all these different productions. Who's, who's going to act Hamlet, and who's going to act Polonius and Ophelia. But you have to explain why you choose these elements, and then you weave them together into an interpretation of your own. It
Yeah.
worked. I mean,
Yeah.
they
It
loved it.
worked. And isn't it amazing the stuff that we think will work? A great idea when we're planning a class.
Uh-huh.
So we're going to get on syllabus right now, just for a moment.
Okay.
These great ideas, and almost invariably they fail and fail horribly. Like, and then something happens spontaneously in class. You say something, you're not even trying to make a joke, and there's
Mhm.
an outburst of laughter, and you're going, "Oh, this is the way, right?"
Right.
But how
Right.
did I know this 3 months ago when I was writing a syllabus
You
on what
could.
we're supposed? You
You
got to
could.
have this flexibility.
Absolutely. And when you try it the next time, it won't work.
That's right. The same thing doesn't work again. Uh,
Because classes are living, entities. They're like the relationships. You have a relationship with this class. It's unlike any other relationship with any other class.
yeah,
And it's living, and that's what's wonderful about it. And why, when they try to can it into the syllabus or best practices, hate that term. I'll tell you what the best practices are. The best practices are what the teacher, professor can get to work best, period. And,
that's it. Gayle, could you explain what it is that we don't like about what we're asked to do with the syllabus?
well, we were not in the past. It was not required of us that we account for ourselves, that we produce student learning outcomes that could be measured. We were trusted. Education was a public trust. Trust is a really important part of education, and it's social distrust that is made for this accountability, which is really bordering on surveillance. I mean, we are under surveillance. And suddenly, we have to produce these student learning outcomes on our syllabus. But more than that, the syllabus is just bloated out into this. My syllabi remained at 2 pages, and I could get away with that because I was senior. Nobody wanted to challenge me, and everybody, I was soon to retire. So I just turned in 2 pages of syllabi. But my colleagues were doing these god-awful things that were like, they were supposed to be contracts. They're not contracts. They're not legally binding. There's no ground for that. But that's what we were told. And they were like 18 pages. They were full of boilerplate. They were just junk. They were supposed to cover every possible contingency. So as you say, contingencies that, well, I didn't tell you couldn't pee on the floor, but, I mean, they can't possibly cover every contingency for one thing. And for another thing, they were simply not legally binding. That's a fiction. But they, were part of, just making us accountable and, controlling the faculty. The thing is that students don't read them. I mean, the longer they are, the less they get read. Brevity is the soul of wit, as we know, as Shakespeareans. And I found that, like with the 2-page syllabus, they read it. I mean, because it had, useful, vital information like, will there not be a final? My answer to that was always a definite maybe, but, but it was just and the sad thing was that everybody kind of went along with it. And oh yeah, the other thing is that this didn't happen at Scripps, but it happened to colleagues of mine at University of Minnesota and Michigan and stuff. That there was a committee and they had to send their syllabus off to the committee to be approved. And sometimes the committee had problems with it. So they would send it back to the faculty member, and the faculty member would have to rewrite and resubmit it to the committee. Woo! I mean, what country are we in? I mean, it's something like, Soviet practice in a way. So I think when you get angry or upset about this syllabus, and I just ignored it, we have every right to, because it's incredibly offensive.
Yeah. Well, we should clarify. There's nothing wrong with making sure the students know what's going to happen in the class.
Oh, absolutely.
And to do that with some degree of specificity. They don't want to walk in and suddenly you're talking about Charles Dickens when they were expecting Emily Dickinson or Shakespeare or anybody else. They kind of like to know where you're going, if you're going to be teaching what they expect you to teach, and the expectations of the instructor and so forth, and all these things that can be put on 2 pages, and that
Right,
students will
exactly.
read. And
Yeah. And I found, that for my beginning courses, I tended to be maybe 5 pages. I mean, they needed a little bit more, more guidelines. But for a Shakespeare class, I mean, really, a list of the readings, times were never certain in my class because I never knew how long we were going to be on a class. If we got going into a play, we would stay on that play. If we didn't have much to say, we moved on quickly. And the writing assignments, that's a whole other thing, because now there's AI to deal with.
What is it? Chat GPT, which is extraordinarily good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Have you've
played with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's coming. But I mean, calculators came.
Well, I know, but the thing,
typewriters, spell checkers came, things like that.
but you don't want this stuff to be writing. I mean, this is an argument for small classes and professors who know their students, and writing in class where you know what they can say, what they're capable of. And you don't have to mess with this stuff. I mean, if you announce paper topics too soon, but I've always known this. I mean, I've always wanted to know what they can write. I want to hear the sound of their voice. I want to get to know that voice. And that way I don't have to deal with plagiarism.
I'm interested in the fact that you started out with Taming of the Shrew, Midsummer Night's Dream. Those were your priority plays.
Taming of the Shrew is a terrific play to start with because it's so controversial and it's so, in a way, obnoxious, and this is a woman's college. There's a lot of sort of heightened sensibilities and sensitivities in my classes, and many of the students are simply outraged. How could you assign something like this patriarchal, brutal play? And is this the way they saw women back then? Well, who is they? And how did they see women back then? So we fill in stuff like that. I asked them to Google the headless woman, the silent woman, and images of the headless woman come up. Anyway, we talk about stereotypes and what is a shrew, and does a shrew get made or is a shrew born, and Kate's situation. There's all sorts of things to talk about in that play. And it kind of, it's a critique of the patriarchy. It demonstrates the patriarchy in action like crazy. Petruchio saying, she is my ass, my ox, my anything, he's just stating law. He's absolutely right in that case. And she's hauled off, to without her permission. She's married to this madcap ruffian and hauled off. And this is like social reality. This is what happened to women in the Renaissance. It's not so funny. But on the other hand, it's also a critique of the system because it's exploring it, and it's also quite funny. If you play it for laughs, which I think you kind of have to make it palatable at all. And what's really kind of marvelous about the play is that Kate learns how to she learns how to live within this system. Now, many of my students are never going to be happy with this play, and I'm certainly not going to try to force them to see it. I'm just going to show my way, which is that it is a play about play. It's a play in which the main character learns how to play. And you can see that on the road back to Padua with Kate, with Petruchio saying, it is the sun, it's the moon, and Kate finally catching on and saying, okay, it's the sun, it's the moon, and a hand goes up in my class and says, that's like my mom with my dad. Anything you say, dear, she's got it. That's absolutely it. Kate is learning to work the system to her own credit. So then we look at the last long speech where she talks to, speechifies to her, sermonizes really to her sisters on stage and to the offstage audience. Thy husband is thy lord, thy sovereign, thy keeper, and whatever he says goes, and so forth. How is she going to say those lines now? Have we seen that to be a woman beaten into submission, as many people saw her at the beginning of discussions? Well, maybe not. Maybe this is a woman who's learned something about play. And why are we talking about play anyway? Well, anyway, the play is a play within the play, because remember Christopher Sly, he comes back into the picture, and actually he falls asleep and a play is performed. What play is that? This play that we're watching. What was the motto of Shakespeare's theater? The world's a stage, and all the play, men and women merely players. And so I teach the play as a play about play and about laughter and about love and laughter and imagination. She has actually learned how to play a role. Now, as I say, many of my students are not so happy with that interpretation, and they're in good company. A lot of people find this play unpalatable, but as Emma says, you can, there's a lot of space for interpretation in a Shakespeare play. And this leads into Midsummer Night's Dream, of course, which is also extremely playful. And in fact, I ask students to perform it. And that is really revelatory because they get up there they don't have to memorize the roles. They can, use their cell phones and read the lines. But they learn a huge amount doing that. They learn how much fun
a famous play within a play.
Right. And that is, they get into that with this kind of, zany Monty Python humor of the artisans play. And they, they really get into it. If they don't get into it, I know I'm in for a long ride. It means the class has just got no sense of humor, but usually they do, And so this is, I mean, it's also, the argument that we can get into about both these plays, the battle of the sexes. I mean, whose side is Shakespeare really on? Well, that's not really, you can't answer that. And it's not really a particularly valid literary critical, question, but it is like, it does get them lined up. Are these plays critiques of the patriarchal system, or are they celebrations of it? And the answer is, with Shakespeare, always yes. It's both and,
Yes.
it's not either or with Shakespeare. And that's one of the things that's quite wonderful about Shakespeare, is he requires a kind of complexity of vision, that you hold two points of view in mind at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which we need. I mean, because we tend to dualities and either ors and fundamentalism. We're really, really becoming fundamentalist. Not only Islam, but Christians.
Yeah.
And lots of people in the society, my way or the highway.
One thing I appreciated about you, I said, I'm glad Gayle wrote this book, because if I tried to do it, I would be, it would just destroy me. And I would end up with a rant, and I'd have to go back because, and everything you have, yeah, there is a sternness there. This is what happened. This is how we of the people who were doing things time proven through centuries of education and have had the exquisite privilege of print technology and now internet technology and greater literacy and being able to reach more people, how someone, and in time-proven methods of instruction, someone would come back in and try to destroy it, or make these constant efforts to fix that which is not broken. That bothers me more than the destroyers.
Everybody is just following orders, and the orders, I tracked this process down, where they came from. They came from the Bush administration.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. They came from the same people who gave us No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
And they gradually filtered, through the regional assessment associations, have taken their orders from people who are taking their orders essentially from business, because businesses always wanted to manage education.
Yeah.
I mean, they wanted to turn us into a workforce, because that's what we're good for. I start the book with a quote. I'm not sure public schools understand that we are their customer. We, the business community, are their customer. What they don't understand is they are producing a product. Now, is that product in a form that we can use it, or is it defective and we're not interested? This is the view of the business community to education. He's talking, I believe, here about K-12, but it doesn't matter. I mean, because it applies to higher education as well. This is what I mean by dehumanization. I mean, my students are not a product, and they're not an it. I mean, they're human beings. And it's this whittling down of the human being to a part of the workforce, a widget in the workforce, a consumer, a producer, that makes the economy run. And that my book is really pitted against. I mean, it's like rehumanization of a system. I mean, the humanities is about humanization. We have to resist the tendency to dehumanization. And we also have to teach something that's a bit broader than being a widget in the workforce, because there are huge crises on the horizon. As we all know, there's climate change. There's refugee populations larger than at any time in history. What kind of education are those people getting? I mean, they're huge, huge armies of refugees. They're not getting a liberal arts education, I'll tell you that. There's poverty, there's a wealth gap that's larger than it's been, since the Gilded Age. I mean, we are exceeding the Gilded Age, actually. If kids come out, with an accountant degree, knowing how to be an accountant, with a degree in pharmacology, knowing how to be a pharmacologist, is your friend's son, or I think it was a son, brother, daughter, they're not going to be up to these crises. We're going to need people who can really think, and who can connect and create we're going to need all the imagination and all the resources the human race can muster. So this is a whittling down of education and of vision, that's actually suicidal to civilization. It may be good for Exxon, but it's not good for the world.
I think one of the best things that happened to us, even though it was a horrible thing, was the year 2008. And that was the last stand. I think that this huge business, stocks, banking, whatever, I think that they should have been punished more than they were.
Oh, they should have. Yeah.
But the fact is, it made it abundantly clear that they didn't know their from a hole in the ground.
Yeah, but it didn't matter because they're back doing all that same
That's right. They do come back.
They just because they have the money and the power.
Crawl out from under the rocks, and there they are again. Or
right.
They just want to get in here. They see money, and even what you're talking about, but even in the idea of the whole kind of failure of these massive online educational programs that were supposed to bring around what I joke with a colleague of mine, the ideal institution, and that is no faculty, no faculty, and really no students, not gathered together, just a bunch of people paying money into a server somewhere. And that would be the perfect place, and trying to generate profits from that, because they see how, these big tuition dollars, people paying for this. But I don't think.
And they're expanding. They're having, especially since the pandemic, which drove everybody online. So the administrator said, "Oh, hey, look, this can work." Well, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
Nobody
that's not going to get through. It was so abundantly clear. And you were retired before the pandemic.
Thank goodness.
Good
yes.
grief.
I didn't have to. You taught online, did you?
Yeah, it's a form of mental illness. It's just a sustained mental illness that there was no therapy for students and teachers, where we're lost in the void.
Yeah.
And I'm teaching to avatars, because my students are Japanese and they're very shy about coming on.
So they're avatars.
Yeah, and they just see these little kittens, and then over here some kind of guy has a demon, and I don't even know what's happening back there.
Did you see that? I wrote an article for New what the hell is it called? The American Prospect, TAP, and about ed tech, and it starts. Did you see that it went viral? It's this sweet little, woman who comes on. She says, "I've written a song about what it's like to do online teaching." And it goes like this. And she strums her ukulele a few times and then screams. It's this primal scream, like of total frustration. That made the national news. I mean, that was played on news stations, all over Facebook. And that's how I started this article. I'll send you a link to the article.
Please do. We'll put it up too.
Oh, great. Okay.
Because I haven't come across it, because I was kind of grappling with your book. It's just out. And Hopkins very gratefully did not price this as an academic book.
Right.
It is an affordable price that mere mortals can buy. It doesn't have to be an institutional purchase, and it's out there in Kindle also. Yes, the online teaching thing was horrible. It was good that we could at least make some progress and not shut everything down.
Right.
So it was good in that I did have to organize my classes in ways that I'd never had before. Because of just the very nature of things. And there's some good technology out there that we in our earlier careers did not have. The Google Classroom and some of my colleagues, I evaded this because I saw this coming, but there's always that kid who used to see you on campus and say, "I'm so sorry, there was traffic or whatever, I couldn't make it to class today. Did we do anything in class today?" To which you just want to and then if you're a male, I'm a fairly good sized male, if I start screaming on campus, it doesn't look good. We did a couple of things, and maybe go to one of your friends and get their notes or whatnot. But now, Gayle, we can put everything up there. The handout, everything. And if a little bit of a film clip, that's not violating any copyright or whatever. And you go, just go to our classroom today and answer your little study questions, and that should keep you up a bit.
Everything but the classroom chemistry, everything
Everything
but the
but the
magic,
classroom.
and what really went on. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's just a condensation. It's like an outline. It's nothing to do with, it's like reading the score, a
Yeah.
musical score but you're not hearing it. I mean, yeah, I think,
But it's an
I mean,
answer. It's an answer you can give these kids who do miss the
of
class.
course,
Of course,
yeah, and it's
and
better than nothing. It's a
well,
lot
it's
better.
better than me carrying 3 weeks of handouts into my I teach the Bible also, and have a lot of handouts. And then there are people
Yeah,
who come in and say, "Do you have last week's handout?" And I would have to look
right,
through a big bag.
right.
So no,
Yeah,
it's up there now. It's
it's
online,
up
and
there. No, that's, I mean, yeah.
I'm so happy to be back. In the
Oh, I
classroom
know,
now.
no. And I hope that's the general feeling and that people really do hang on to the person to person, because that's, I mean, learning takes place, between and among human beings. It doesn't, there's that experiment that, it was a 2003 paper about teaching Mandarin to infants.
Hmm.
Western infants, and there were three ways. One was audio, and one was screens, and one was a human tutor, to make those quite different sounds from English, and that it's hard to pick up when in later learning language. And the only one that had any effect was the human tutor, the
Hmm.
human in the room, not on the screen,
Hmm.
but in the
Hmm.
room. I mean, infants don't learn from screens, they're fascinated by them. They love them, but they don't learn. They learn from people, because that's the kind of species we are. We have a long period of vulnerability. We have to learn, how to survive in the world. And we look to grown-up people. We want to please our parents. We want to please our teachers. And that's where motivation comes from. And you don't have learning without motivation. You just don't have it. I mean, the kid has got to want to learn. And we learn from other people.
Hmm.
So, you can't substitute a screen for that. You
No,
can supplement it, of course,
yeah.
in useful ways, but you can't substitute. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I see on the positive end. We do have some. You and I
Mm.
can talk today through this technology. If
Yeah, exactly.
10 years ago, if you'd put out
Yeah.
a book,
Yeah.
how are we
Yeah.
going to do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
difficult. I wouldn't know. You wouldn't know exactly what to do, and
Yeah.
might have been able to do something through Skype, but that was not developed yet. And
I know. No.
so you're part of a series here that I'm doing, as you know, and I could the original grant that I put out was meant. It only could have. We might have had 6 scholars visit Tokyo over
Mhm.
3 years,
Yeah.
and I've
Yeah. Yeah.
talked. I think we're in the 40s now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I find that to be much better than trying to select. Because there's so many good people out there.
It's wonderful. I know. And when I want to know about somebody or somebody's work, I just go onto YouTube. I find their lectures, I don't have to go to their talks. I mean, it's really, truly wonderful. It's just, I mean, where this online, that Bill Gates kind of computerized learning worked was with people who knew already how to use. I mean, they were educated. They weren't kids. So that's a big difference. I mean, a series like this, I mean, it's terrific. I mean, it gets the word out. It can be used by all sorts of other, scholars and grown-ups, but they're grown-ups, they're not people who are learning the kind of basics.
Yeah, I
It-
like to think of it too as something of a pushback, just to talk about what your subject is. If you want to paint us as a bunch of post-Maoist indoctrinators of young people, where we come in
Yeah,
and tell
yeah,
them that
yeah,
they
yeah.
need to consider being another gender, or they need to. When you meet these people that I'm talking to, that's not this, or they're in their ivy tower. They have ascots and
Right,
pipes. They think they're better
right,
than we are, and they're
right,
smarter. Da da
right.
da. You see these people for who they are, how hard they work,
Yeah, yeah,
how committed they are, how much they love doing what they do,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I think that's one little small weapon in the fight against this drive to eliminate us, which it really
Absolutely.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
And
No, it's a
also
huge,
we get to know each other
yeah,
because
yeah,
you go, oh, that guy isn't a smug bastard out of Oxford. He's actually a kind of obsequious guy who just works really hard on footnotes that
I
have
know,
helped me a lot, in my teaching of Shakespeare. Annotations, the people who
yeah,
do these
yeah,
things
yeah,
are often
yeah.
just extraordinarily nice and interesting, and we get to meet them.
I mean, it's actually a wonderful instrument because it's humanizing a stereotype. And as you say, there are so many stereotypes of academics out there. And yeah, meet us, talk to us. And that's you'll be surprised. Um,
Well, what I feel, Gail, this is part of a sub part. I'm wanting to get more educators on and bring education in, and
mhm,
I'm looking for ways to talk about Shakespearean education, and that, of course, is scalable to all humanities. I mean, we could
mhm.
put what you're doing with Shakespeare, you could take into Arthur Miller, you could take into a Russian novelist, and you could bring it into women writers,
I
and
do.
and I'm sure you
Yeah,
do. And I do remember the time when there needed to be more women introduced into the canon of study.
yeah,
My goodness, it was awful. If
yeah,
you go back to the 70s, you'd go
yeah,
to a class on the history of the novel, and the
yeah.
professor would just not think to put Edith Wharton or
Virginia
something.
Woolf,
Virginia
I
Woolf,
I never read Virginia
Emily
Woolf.
Dickinson. Come
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
these are
yeah,
these are big form people,
sure. Yeah.
and have that I have moved me more than maybe some of the other canonical figures that are brought in. So
I know. I mean, and one of the things points I try to get across in the book is the uses of Shakespeare, because we're accused of being useless. I mean, what good are they for? What
mhm,
good are the humanities for? It's not going to improve my salary and so forth, which is a lie. I mean, actually, liberal arts degrees do get people into, considerably. They're good wage earners, but you have to wait until mid-career kind of to find that
that's
out.
right.
That doesn't happen right away.
Yeah,
But the uses of Shakespeare are just incredible because, for one thing, these are people relating to other people, interpreting other people, reading other people. And you see how you're trying to get them to read the plays, but you're also reading about characters who are reading other characters. Gets a little complicated, and are reading badly. And that's the source of tragedy. I mean, if you look at every one of his tragic heroes, they're really bad readers. I mean, and that's what happens. They listen to the wrong people. I mean, Macbeth, oh no, don't don't listen to that woman. Don't listen to the witches. Othello, there are better, I mean, Lear, no, why don't you try hearing what, Cordelia is actually saying? And Brutus, I mean, how can he be swayed by Cassius and brought into a coup, a bloody political coup for which he is not equipped? He is so ill-equipped. I mean, I think I would be better equipped
I
than he.
know.
you
If you're
know
naive,
so they listen to the wrong people. They're bad readers, and it's like an object lesson in good reading. You have to,
mhm,
like, I mean, what do they do wrong? We spend a lot of time, where are their blind spots? Why are they so stupid? They're not stupid characters, but they're
mhm,
stupid about themselves, and they listen to the wrong people. That's really a survival skill. I mean, if
it
you can
is.
get across
Yeah,
half of that, listen, look, read, interpret. I mean, you live in a world of human beings who are trying to manipulate you. People have agenda. I mean, more than ever now, PR and advertising and, join this and be this and think this way. You have to think for yourself. You have to figure out how to read the world.
yeah,
And I mean, what better, writer than Shakespeare for that? He's just
yeah,
full of bad examples,
yeah.
how not
Absolutely.
to.
Well, uh, wanted to bring up one example. I have a friend who was very much pushed his daughter to go into pharmacology rather than humanities.
Yeah.
And because you step out into a six-figure job, which is good money for a young
Exactly.
person,
Sure, of course.
good money for everybody. But the uh, so she did it, and she gets to work in a Walmart. That's where you have a pharmacy.
Yeah.
So and I spoke with her about this, and she said, "Yeah, I stand on my feet 10 hours a day. I go like." He said, even Walmart shoppers don't want to spend all day in Walmart.
Yeah.
So that's my life. I make the
I
money.
know. I
And
know.
and I've talked with scores of other people who have made the money, people who
Yeah.
have dropped out and gone into teaching
Mm-hmm.
and have
Mm-hmm.
felt more fulfilled because of that. And of course, people who have that flexibility. I know people who were accounting majors, engineering majors, who felt some regret that they didn't learn more in college
Me
about
too.
the stuff
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it's just so abundantly clear that you're right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get to the kind of ending that you go into about why is this? Why, when when we're forming these narratives, whether they come over on cable news or in certain publications, why is it that whatever journalists, business managers, they never seem to walk down to the factory floor. They never seem to get in a car and drive to Southern Virginia and walk into an elementary school and see if the
Yeah.
teachers are actually, flogging their students with gender identity. They
Yeah.
never
Well,
seem,
right.
they never seem to come and talk to us or sit in our classrooms, and they don't talk to our graduates, some of whom are among these people.
Yeah.
There's just no, and
Yeah.
that's what you do toward
Yeah.
the end. You talk
Yeah.
about that. That is
Yeah.
don't talk to us about it until you talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's proof positive.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I mean, it's education is talked about by top-down experts who really don't know anything about it, and the media is really complicit in this because when they do an article on K-12 or something, they talk to the business person because they really respect business more than they do teachers. Why? Because businessmen make more money than teachers, and money talks, everybody respects money. So somebody like Bill Gates, who is a college dropout, can devise the Common Core is really kind of his brainchild. And it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And it's this
And
top down.
a document. It's not just Gayle saying this. This is a
Right. Thank
documented
you.
disaster.
There are
You know,
many people saying it.
yes.
Read Diane Ravitch. I mean, she's kind of the word on this because
Yeah.
she was part of the planning of No Child Left Behind and high stakes exam. And then she realized what it was opening up education as a market. It was just for marketeers and for profiteers. And she became a whistleblower. Very courageous to change her position since she was high up in the bush, anyway, that's a whole other story, but it's just so here we are saddled with these schemes and these assessments, testing, measurements, and opinions that get magnified in the press. And one of the things I really recommend is when you read an article about education, check out the authors, check your source, find out who their funding is, find out what think tank they're from and who funds that think tank. And it often comes back to these, this handful of billionaires, really, who has a better mousetrap. I think Gates is probably well-intentioned. I don't think he set out to destroy the educational
No.
system, which is what he's pretty
Yeah.
much done.
That's
I'm really
that's how
sorry.
you pave the path to hell, right?
Yeah, it's
Ohio. Yeah.
really, and there's so much misinformation about teaching and teachers, and you've described some of it, the stereotypes, the crazy wokes who are trying to get you to change your identity, and the ivory tower out of it, and all these, stereotypes, and the media perpetuates them, but some of it's sinister. I mean, some of it is actually funded by people who want you to think that way. Some of it's just ignorance, a lot of it's ignorance.
Yeah, it's kind of social media hysteria and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
discontented souls And invariably, though, Gail, I'll listen to a podcast and somebody will come on and I will agree with most of what they say. And then we'll say, well, the university is where all this starts. That's where these kids are told about how, to be woke. That's how they're indoctrinated. And I want to jump into the podcast and say, would you look and throw out a few curse words at a map of the Ohio State University and how many engineers they graduated, how many people in the medical sciences they graduated last year, and all of these other places, and then look at how many people graduated in gender studies, if they even have the program.
Exactly.
That cannot be the wellspring, the source. I think I think some of the vocabulary out of these, post-structuralists or critical thinking, some of the vocabulary has been adopted by people on social media and then somehow reached into the corporate world.
No, it's as you say, there's a certain social media hysteria, but there's also, I don't know, there's always been an anti-intellectualism in America that's really come to the fore, I mean, a real kind of desire to kill higher education. There's a lot of jealousy. I mean, I think they know that some of us are having fun, some of us have actually enjoyed our jobs, which is not what many people can say in this culture. In the society.
Well, Gayle, in closing, though, what I would like to point out is that, if you go to my background, I won't be indulgent here, but you came through, it wasn't easy. You were teaching as an adjunct at in the CUNY system, and you're there trying to pay rent in New York City, a lot lower then than it is now, but it is not an easy road. You're working with these people, front line, first generation people from not wealthy homes and moving into the kind of more ivory tower of Columbia and finishing up a dissertation at the same time. This is not easy stuff that we did. And we may have paid a little bit forward, and sometimes we do get some flexibility down the road. And of course, now everybody has to publish, everybody has to sit on committees, all and then fill out forms for assessment forms, that kind of thing. Anybody wants to call this an easy road, and try it, give it a try.
Yeah, this is true. And I came across a really interesting, how conservatives say, oh, well, they never hire us and we're not represented in academia and they're all left-wingers and stuff. I mean, this study pointed out that conservatives tend to take themselves off the track. They don't want to get PhD. They don't want to do this. It's hard.
It's hard.
The wages are not terrific. I mean, they're just not. I mean, I didn't have a family to support, so my wage was fine for me. Also, I had a supportive family of origin, but it's not. I mean, if I looked at my colleagues who had 3 and 4 kids, and I thought, how do they do it? This is like, it's a living wage, but it's not. Anyway, conservatives, they don't want that. They take themselves off. That they don't go for PhDs. They go for business degrees. They're not well represented in academia because they don't want to be. That's an important point to get across. I mean, I really think, we're not selecting against them. They're selecting themselves. I'm painting with a very broad brush here, I know. But, and I can give you the reference. It's in the book, that study. That was very interesting.
And also you have to be flexible. You have to be willing to go from the West Coast to Chicago. You were at the University of Chicago for a short period, and then to the East Coast. And then when the job comes open at a place you didn't know that well, you take it and just hope for the best, because you were you grew up more closer to Palo Alto, I think, which is now very Palo Alto, but it wasn't when you were coming up. But Scripps is another world, down south, and so you have to be willing to do that. We are journey people in that regard. So if you're willing to do all of that, all right, you can slip out 15 years later when you manage to get your salary going and things settled and shoot around a golf on Tuesday afternoon. Sorry. You know,
I
we
just
get to do
play
that.
golf.
I know that would be me, and not very good
I
golf.
write books in my spare
But
time.
we there were some guys at this club said, "You professors don't ever work. You know, here you're out playing golf. And I'm retired." And go,
I
yeah,
know, I know.
yeah,
I
we
hear
do.
that all the time.
Yeah, it could be
Yeah.
tennis for someone
Come
else or
along
hiking.
for a day in my shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
No, yeah, exactly. It's another stereotype to break down. I mean, and teachers, poor teachers,
oh
like,
my
oh, they get
goodness.
all that vacation. Teachers
Oh
never get vacation.
no,
I
they
mean,
don't.
they are the hardest working people in the world,
Oh
and the
my.
least appreciated.
And the least appreciated.
I
And
think they're the heroes of our
that
time.
wasn't always the case. You know, that
Yeah.
wasn't
Oh,
always.
I know. I mean, when I went to
Yeah,
school, first of all, there were more men and and now it's three quarters women because the men
yeah,
they try to get out. But it's they were paid what NFL players were paid. They were paid the same salary as engineers. They were respected. Now they're like a punching bag.
yeah.
And it's a horrible
It's
thing.
just it is. It's all.
And they're leaving and they're not replenishing the pipeline. People don't want to go into teaching anymore. The right wing doesn't care at all because all you do is lower the credentials. And now all you have to do is have a BA, and in some states, not even a BA.
Yeah,
They don't,
yeah,
and then we'll turn it over to machines anyway.
yeah. Well, that's one of the things that led me to Japan because the professorate is still viewed as part of the corporate structure, so the pay scales are much better, to put it bluntly.
That's
And
nice.
and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
drew me because
Yeah.
I was going under,
I know.
and I
I
was
know.
no spring chicken, and
No.
I knew 2 words of Japanese, so basically I had to move here, learn a new language, and adapt to this culture, which is not heaven on earth all the time. It has been great for me,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
some of these problems that we're talking about now are encroaching in my colleagues, my Japanese colleagues, and I
No. No.
talk about
No.
this.
No.
And
No.
so,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but that was, I just remember talking to my college roommate who became an eye surgeon. And I said, John, look, when I decided to go into this business, I knew you were going to make 3 times more than maybe
Right.
4. I
Right.
didn't know you were going to make 20 times more than I make, or, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20. And I just think we should get paid a little more. We were paid so miserably when I first started. It was awful.
Yeah.
And he said, if you want more money, you're going to have to find a job that pays more money, which kind of irritated me at the time. But I thought about it and I go, okay, I'm
Yeah.
flying to Japan.
Yeah.
I can,
Interesting. Really.
so uh,
Yeah.
I don't, all the people out there don't have this advantage. And of course we could go on and on about the people who have been put in a kind of hell of teaching part-time.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
whole large
I
class
know.
of
And
adjunct
and
professors.
growing. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
here too, here in
Yeah.
Tokyo too,
Yeah. Yeah.
it tends to pay a bit better and you tend to be able to get to place easier than the freeway flyers,
I
and
know. I
but
know.
uh, but that's for another time, and
Yeah.
that's just to me greed because I
Oh,
think
yeah.
you could set up
Exploitation. Yeah.
an exploitation. It really
Yeah.
is.
It's horrible.
It is horrible.
You
It's
know.
a horrible thing, and I just hope that there's enough of a rear guard action here, a counterforce or something, leadership among maybe younger people coming up.
Well, the strikes have been good news. I
And
mean,
that's
that
been good news.
huge UC strike, and
Uh-huh.
they didn't get enough out of it, but they got a lot. I
Yeah.
mean,
I'm a union man. We have a union here, and
yeah,
it saved our butts
yeah, oh yeah,
about 10
I
years
know.
ago.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I can't go into great detail about that, but
yes, yeah,
I'll go down to Union Hall and sing the song and stand the line.
yeah,
It didn't come to that. It came to more of a legalistic
yeah,
thing and was
yeah,
all
yeah,
solved very
yeah,
civilly. But the that's what the good old answers to the old questions, or the old problems, the same old solutions. You have to bind together, hold the line.
United we stand,
Yeah.
and that's what this horrible the encroachment of managerial administration assessments. I wish faculty would stand up to that. I
I do.
found I just have not found a lot of faculty. I mean, they make fun of it, they fudge it, they lie, they think they're getting away with something. It's not funny, and it's
Yeah,
not, you're not getting away with something.
yeah,
You need to stand up and and say, this sucks. I mean,
yeah,
this doesn't make any sense. This is an encroachment, an infringement, waste of resources, waste of time. I retired. Frankly, that was one of the things that pushed me out.
yeah.
And I have talked to more people who have done that. And so what they're
I
doing is
have too.
getting rid of the critics. The critics leave, if they can.
Yeah.
And the young people who are used to assessment, who are used to, I don't know, they just bend and so there's
And
no reason
they
to
will
do.
be destroyed
Yeah,
in
it
many
will destroy
cases.
the system. I mean,
They,
even if
they
they
will,
get away with it personally for a while, it will destroy the system. And
yeah. But
there
they will
ought
be
to,
destroyed. If you don't get tenure, you're just you're a leper out there. And
yeah. And even if you do get tenure, you're going to watch the system go down the toilet. I mean, because that's what's happening. And, they really, it makes me I mean, that is one of the things that gets me really heated under the collar about, like talking to people. Oh, well, we just fudged it and it was fun.
yeah,
It's not fun.
yeah. There needs to be much more solidarity in
Yeah,
all of this, and
right.
let's hope because our star is whatever it was. We just don't. It's going to take time and effort and organization
Yeah.
and
Uh,
people who are savvy in media manipulation, who know how
yeah.
to get points across.
Yeah.
And we hope to have help from politicians, from people of influence. I do see a new generation of business leaders who would be on our side,
Oh,
uh,
that's nice.
and particularly in tech.
Mm-hmm.
Because they go,
Mm-hmm.
we can hire programmers all day long, but we need people who can think.
Right.
I heard a talk from a woman with Intel who was doing Native American studies at Stanford, and she was snapped up by Intel and said,
Interesting.
"Yes, we
Yeah.
need you
Yeah.
to tell women across the world that they can do our kind of stuff."
Mm-hmm.
And to show them
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing. We want you to, because we're all a bunch of guys here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she has found her way doing that. And they didn't care that she was an expert in whatever Native American history.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted somebody who could communicate
Right.
on a
Right.
global scale, and they had
Yeah.
smart people there who knew, you
Yeah.
know, who approached her and
Yeah.
listened to her. So
Yeah.
there's some
Yeah.
great stories out there, and I think that we might see some kind of transformative period.
That's
And
hard.
they haven't done away with us yet. Uh,
We're still here.
uh, well, there's one quick story. They tried to the Ministry of Education. There was a group in there. It's this big. I'm not going to equate it to a Death Star, but this is huge Ministry of Education in Japan, and one group in there has decided our national universities funded by the people really don't need these humanities schools, and we can save all this money. And
That's
went so
right.
far
You're
as,
right about
yeah, they
that. Yeah.
drafted it in a couple of
Yeah.
the national universities, the lower level ones did get rid of their School of Humanities. And when that got out to the University of Tokyo and what in Japan are these, I mean, untouchable elite institutions, Kyoto, it's just a sort of, are you kidding me? We're not going to be teaching the history of the Japanese language to the Japanese people anymore. Da da
Wow.
da da. That could be apocryphal, but
Mm-hmm.
something happened there and it died. That whole thing died. And then there
Interesting.
was an issue saying we didn't proofread our policy statement well enough, and we've corrected that problem now. So they
Wow.
backed off. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
they hit a
Yeah.
wall with that, and I imagine some careers were destroyed, and
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
very interesting. That's like
yeah,
the Scott Walker story where he said, "Oh, well, he changed the mission statement of the University of Wisconsin
that's
so
right.
that
The governor of
yeah, yeah,
Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, yes.
right. Instead of the search for truth and social something or other, it was to serve workforce needs." And they said, "Wait a minute, what are you talking about?"
No,
And he said, oh, that was a proofing error, you know.
No, you're not coming in here and stripping the varnish off of our institution.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well, there needs to be more of that. And, you
yeah.
know, I just hope there is. Anyway, my book is a part of that sort of mission to kind of save the
It's,
humanities.
it's going to take a lot of us. You know,
I know. I know.
Gayle, it's going to take a lot of
I
us to do
know.
this. You think about the great cathedrals and anything that's been built is great. And you think, who did this? And the answer is always a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
And how easy it is to destroy.
how
You can
easy it
destroy
is
a
to destroy.
cathedral with a well-placed
That's
bomb.
right.
And that's what's happening, you know. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's so much easier to destroy than to create.
It is so much easier. Uh, I'm going to close off. I
Yeah.
could talk with you for hours upon hours
Yeah.
about
It's
this.
been
Just
fun.
and one of the points here in this series is that we do open up things like in conversation
Hmm.
rather than a formalized interview,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Which I'm sure in this book you're going to be doing plenty of. So good luck with that. If I may ask you to stay after we finish recording to
Of
debrief
course.
just a moment. And but before that, I wanted to thank you again. I have colleagues, all of my colleagues in Japan are deeply involved with educational theory. They're interested in how to present Shakespeare to their students. Humanities literary study is not done on the high school level, on the grade school level in Japan. And a couple of my younger colleagues are working to say, ask that question, why not? Why don't we do? And
Uh-huh.
so in the university, we do some of it, but sometimes we're with students who have, no background in it to begin with. And there are people who are teaching Shakespeare all over the world and teaching literature all over the world who I hope could listen to some of this and get some ideas. But if you really want a lot of ideas, go to your book and and read that book. There's some wonderful stories in there. And it's almost like after I get angry, it's almost like Gayle is saying, okay, now I'm going to tell you some stories about my students, and we're going to lighten up a little bit here, bring in some comic relief in some cases. It's so brilliantly written, and the character descriptions are just worthy of even some of the best kinds of fiction. And again, thank you so very much for joining us
Thank
today.
you. It's been great.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye-bye.